Hey, so this was originally recorded back in 2020. This was pre Rex Heuermann, and I think it's pretty interesting. It's kind of wanted to upload it for the 16th anniversary of Shannan Gilbert's disappearance. She obviously played a huge role in this whole story. None of these families would have got any closure without Shannan Gilbert and her family. So I think it's an important day, and I thought with that we would upload this original footage and we could see what we were thinking prior to Rex Heuermann's arrest and what we got right, what we got wrong. I thought, we did a pretty good job on it, so I put together the part 1 and the part 2, and since it was an early video, some of the music was very loud, so I tried to remix that. I hope that you guys get something out of this. Let me know what you think.
Police have found 10 bodies, all apparently murder victims. They found them while searching for Shannan Gilbert, who apparently fled a home in Oak Beach that fateful night.
These yet unidentified skeletal remains were the last to be found in Suffolk County.
The FBI is offering to help New York homicide investigators as they chase a possible serial killer.
Shannan Gilbert had worked as an escort. She was advertising her trade on Craigslist and worked in the New York City area. On Saturday, May 1st, 2010, Shannan and her driver Michael Pack were wooed to Long Island with a high-paying client. The client, Joseph Brewer, met them at the front gate, as this was a very exclusive neighborhood. All right, this was around 2 a.m. Besides a 20-minute errand that Joseph Brewer and Shannan Gilbert took, presumably to buy drugs, it was a very uneventful night. Michael Pack was playing games on his phone and eventually dozed out. And then around 5 a.m. is when Brewer came in and knocked on the door. "She won't leave," he says. Michael Pack, the driver, never spoke to the guys who hired the girls, but he walked into Brewer's home nonetheless, and he was taken back by the mess. All right, so every inch of the floor, the furniture, everything you could see was covered with debris, and it was just a hoarder's nightmare here. Shannan was behind the couch, and she's yelling, "They're trying to kill me!" Not he is trying to kill me, but they are trying to kill me. Now, at this point, you would figure Michael Pack, the driver, who also acts as security, would be the shining ray of hope for her. And Shannan saved her at this point, but she says, "I'll find my own way home." Confused but compliant, Michael Pack goes to leave. This is when Shannan asks him, "Why are you going?" "What?" Shannan followed up with an out of place, "I'm on Long Island," she says into her iPhone. Pack, realizing she's on the phone with 911 and is very confused by this whole situation because it's escalating very quickly. Nothing good could come from calling the police, he thinks. It's not like their job is, exactly legal. All right, so what happens from here is somewhat short on details, but this is essentially what happened. Shannan burst out the door of Joseph Brewer's home, and she begins frantically knocking on the doors of every neighbor's home that she can see. Just knocking, and remember, this is about 5 a.m., so people are confused. They don't really want to open the door for someone that's like this, even if, it is a woman and she probably needs help. You don't know if it's a scam, so people are hesitant to help. Eventually, she happens upon one of the neighbors' house. His name is Gus Colletti. All right, Gus plays an important part of this story because he's a retired man and he's a very friendly man, a helpful man, let's say. And when he hears the young lady pounding on the door at 5 a.m., he's up already. He opens the door and he says, "How can I help you?" He invites her in, he has her sit down, and she just seems frantic, not listening to what he's saying. She's just speed talking. At which point he says, "I'm going to call the police." When she hears the word police, she bursts out the door again. All right, this is just a repeat of what just happened with Joseph Brewer. He can't understand what's going on. Why did she frantically leave? He was there to help her. When he comes out, he sees Michael Pack, the driver, slowly going down the road, looking. And Gus Colletti gets in front of Pack's car. All right, so he stops Michael Pack and he says, "I just called the police." Now he's figuring that Michael Pack is probably the person she's running from. He doesn't know the whole story. Remember, he just came in, at this very last part. So he thinks that Michael Pack is probably the person she's running from. And Gus Colletti says to him, I just called the cops. Michael Pack, in turn, says, you shouldn't have done that. You're going to get her in a lot of trouble. Very confused by all this. At this point, they both go their own ways trying to search for her. Now, this is really where the details drop off. She disappeared into the night, not to be seen again for at least 18 months. Obviously, all the people that got the knocks on the door were frantically calling. So several people called, but when the cops got there, Shannon's nowhere to be found. Michael Pack's gone. He left. He figured there's nothing he can do at this point. So the cops were left feeling like there was never a crime committed. So they left without an investigation. This was mistake number one. However, because of her disappearance, they did go searching for her several months later. And when they went searching for her, they found 8 women, 1 man dressed as a woman, and a child around 2 years old, all dead in a dumping ground. And that's the story we're going to look at today. The story of the Long Island serial killer is not an easy story to tell. It goes back many decades. We're not even sure if it's one man or several. The bodies are spread out throughout multiple places on Long Island. It's even hard to tell the basics. There's many red herrings, there's gaps, there's much stuff that the police have held back, and then there's stuff that the news have reported, and they're inaccurate as well. I have found that the more research Lisk, the less I know. Most of the story of Lisk starts with the story of Shannan Gilbert, no different than what we just did. Shannan Gilbert wanted to be famous for her music abilities, for her singing. While she never found this in life, in death, she did find a higher purpose. She was famous, but not for what she thought she would be. Since we wouldn't even know of the serial killer without her story, it's fitting. Back around the turn of the century, early 2000s, bodies started piling up in Manorville. At the time, the police said there's no serial killer. Manorville was, and still is to a certain extent, a very desolate area. There's protected pine barrens all around. All right, the Long Island Expressway, the major throughway, snakes its way through, but on the north and the south, there's major areas that are just straight forest. Recently, my brother and I hiked through the area to find the exact spots that the bodies were found. When hiking into the forest, you can feel an uneasiness that must be 1,000 times worse at night. The trees are tight. You can see shadows on the trees, and you're not sure if you're looking at just another dead tree, maybe some debris. We found cars that were easily from the 70s or 80s just dumped. I found a snowmobile, pots, pans, garbage bags everywhere, all in this nature preserve. So it's easy to see that this would be a favorite dumping ground of Lisk. In the early 2000s, when the bodies started stacking up, the local residents, interviewed by the New York Times, said that they thought it was the mob's new favorite dumping ground. That was until 2 small, young females were found in a 3-year period with their hands, limbs, head hacked off, and their new torsos left on display. Macabre as it is, it was pretty clear that there was a common MO. On November 19th, 2000, 3 hunters walking through the area happened upon the first woman, who was only identified 2 decades later thanks to advancements in the DNA. Her name was Valerie Mack.
24 years old in 2000 when she went missing, was described as 5 feet tall and approximately 100 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. She was working as an escort in Philadelphia at the time of her disappearance and also used the name Melissa Taylor. Family members last saw her in the spring or summer of 2000 in the area of Port Republic, New Jersey. She was never reported missing.
Valerie Mack had been a prostitute that plied her trades in several different cities on the East Coast. There's not any information on how long she was in New York or Long Island, but she does turn up in the woods, and they estimate that she was only dead a few days. Oddly enough, 4 days later, after the discovery of Jane Doe, who we find out is Valerie Mack, hunters find a man who was wearing nothing but a pair of boxers. The man in the Gap boxers had been strangled, and that does fit the MO for who we know is now Lisk. All right, it is commonly believed that the victims of Lisk were all strangled. Unfortunately, like I said before, the police at the time, as these bodies were showing up, said there was no serial killer at work, which has been proven to be false. They've also since identified the man in the Gap boxers. However, at the victim's family's request, they haven't identified him publicly. Some have said that this is going to make it more difficult from a detective and investigation standpoint to identify the killer. So it is a little odd. Fast forward a little bit to July 26, 2003. A local woman, she's walking her dog in the woods over here, all right, and she happens upon the second female nude torso. No hands, no limbs, no head. The killer went through great lengths to slice up a tattoo that the Jane Doe had on her lower right kidney, so on her back. And then it was obvious that we're going to show on the screen here that he was slicing it up and down, because he didn't want this to be seen. A quick thinking detective had the medical examiner push the skin back together so that they could take a picture and kind of see what it might have looked like. They immediately saw that there was angel wings, or maybe eagle wings, as the newspaper reported, and they thought it said Pete's Angel. This was the bulk of what the detectives had to go on. DNA wasn't prevalent like it is today, and the body had decomposed so badly they didn't even know if this Jane Doe's race was. They didn't know she was white, Hispanic. When it decomposes that much, it's very hard to tell. Obviously, the killer or killers went way out of their way to cut the head, the limbs, the hands, so that she couldn't be identified. They also believed that that was the reason that they went out of their way to slice up the tattoo, that there may be some kind of identifying mark. This is where a detective working a missing persons case down in Washington, D.C. comes into play. All right, so they published this tattoo after they smushed it together with the medical examiner, and this detective was working on a missing prostitute, a young girl. Her name was Jessica Taylor. He immediately recognized the tattoo, but he said it didn't say Pete's Angel, it actually said Remy's Angel. Remy believing to be the pimp of the young prostitute, Jessica Taylor. Jessica Taylor was last seen at the Port Authority on July 21st, 2003. Now this Port Authority, come up again later. Just keep that in mind. And the medical examiner determined that Jessica Taylor, Jane Doe, had been dead just a few days, so the timing matched up. After a DNA profile, they did realize that this was Jessica Taylor. This obviously made the killer realize that his attempts really weren't going to pan out. So we believe that this may have changed up his MO later. Both Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor had tragedy and trauma that led them to a life of prostitution. But this should have no bearing on the urgency to solve this case and the value of their life. The world was very different in the late 90s when our story actually began. In 1996, when Jane Doe washed ashore, cell phones, they were rare, they were expensive. The security was not like it is today where there's cameras everywhere. A killer in 1996 would have been fully aware of fingerprints. They had been around for at least 100 years at this point. And like most Americans, they would have also been aware of DNA, thanks to the O.J. Simpson trial that had just wrapped up 6 months prior. Fire Island is one of the many barrier islands that sit on the south shore of Long Island. During the summer months, it's a beautiful vacation spot with beaches and bars and all the dressings you would come to expect for an adult summer playground. It's also known for its iconic gay resort, Cherry Grove, where local stories of wild, drug-fueled parties were once whispered about in the 70s and 80s. It's important to note this because that one of the confirmed victims of Lisk was a man dressed in women's clothing. On April 20th, 1996, Robert and Andrew Ragona, two seasonal residents, brothers, were walking along the beach. They were about a mile west of Davis Park on the bay side of the island when they happened upon a black garbage bag. Presumably, out of curiosity, they opened the garbage bag and found two women's legs. Both legs had surgical scars at the ankles, and the right leg had a 3.5-inch scar on the posterior calf muscle. Finally, an L-shaped scar on the shin. Most importantly, the toes were painted a bright red, which A gruesome find, but it indicated that they had possibly not been in the water for too long, that the elements had not eroded it. The female was dubbed the Fire Island Doe, and because of the red paint on her toenails, we assume that she died around that last week of April in 1996. There's very little to know of Fire Island Doe, and to this day, she has never been given her identity back. The story of an unexpected person walking on a beach, walking through the woods, enjoying a nature preserve, enjoying a state park, walking their dog in the morning. This has become a very familiar pattern for the early days of Lisk. These early victims were dumped in ways that it was clear the killer made no effort to hide the body. In some ways, I'm sure he derived pleasure, a sick pleasure at that, knowing that the person who would find these poor girls would also become victimized by the gruesome findings. Their feelings of safety, their neighborhoods, and the serenity of their home all disturbed by his actions. I'm sure he relished the thought when he read it in the newspaper, as something we know many serial killers do. Like the brothers on Fire Island, a man and his daughter were walking around the large man-made Hempstead Lake Park. It's a state park, and in particular they were by the McDonald Pond when they happened upon a Rubbermaid container. This was in 1997. In the Rubbermaid tub, they found a red towel and a green floral pillowcase marked by blood. There was a torso. The head, the arms, and both legs below the knees were missing. She would later be known as Peaches by all that recount this case. This was due to a tattoo of a peach with a bite taken out of it, found on the woman. Detectives at the time felt that this could be a great lead, and then they published a picture of the tattoo in a national magazine that was geared towards tattoo artists. Lo and behold, one Stephen Colin from Connecticut answered this ad. All right, so he actually has an account where he recalls that a young black woman from New York came into his tattoo parlor. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember if the young lady was from the Bronx or Long Island, which is a little weird because they're very different. They're not connected, by any land, and one's suburbia, one's city-like. So I'm not sure why he would confuse Long Island and the Bronx, but he did know that the young lady that came in with an aunt and a cousin. So yeah, she had two people that were with her, but what she did remember was that she was around 18 or 19 years old, and she came in with a cousin and an aunt, and that she was talking about how she was in Connecticut because she was having some issues with her boyfriend. Now, going back to 2010, when the Gilgo bodies were discovered, there was a lot of debate whether there was one killer, two killers, or three killers. Now, the disgraced former district attorney, Thomas Spota, had publicly went against what the detectives were saying, that there was one killer. He disagreed, and one of his main points was that Peaches didn't fit the mold. All right, so you'll see later that when we talk about the Gilgo 4, they have characteristics that are all very similar, whereas Peaches did not. It's now commonly, touted that it's one killer, but then again, who knows? There's been a lot of misdirection in this case. So Spota would argue that there were two killers all dumping in the same area. Now, it's not too hard to think that there could be more than one serial killer dumping and working Long Island. It's happened before. There's 3 million residents on Long Island, and in the 90s, you had Joel Rifkin and Anthony Schulman, both of them killing prostitutes, working off the same type of victim, and they were dumping in the same area. Both were caught, and they also line up with the same time frame we're talking here. However, from what we understand, they don't believe that any of these are Joel Rifkin's or Anthony's victims. I'm sure there's reasons because they haven't released a whole lot to the public. Everything we know has been from investigative work, and even then, some of the stuff is disputed whether it's true or not because it hasn't been confirmed. We've also seen other high-profile cases in the U.S. in different states where you have multiple killers dumping on the same roads. So it wouldn't go without some kind of evidence here that maybe there is multiple. I would have to assume because the disgraced Spota is gone now, and they're saying that there's only one killer, that they must have something that supports that. There certainly seems to be a lot of evidence that does support one killer. Just because Peaches doesn't fit the actual profile type of the rest of them. Namely, it seems like because she was black and the other girls were white. But that's not enough. That's not enough to go off, because there's other non-white victims that, Lisk is credited to as well. So, not a big fan of Spota anyhow, but it's worth noting. So, in this next chapter that we're coming up on right now, we're going to discuss how Peaches, Jessica Taylor, Valerie, Mack, all would be connected to the victims found by Gilgo Beach. This is how we connect all of them throughout time. This is also where we find that Lisk was one of the most prolific serial killers on Long Island history. The story of Lisk would not have come, or maybe not anywhere near as quickly as it did, if it was not for Shannan Gilbert's story. May 2nd, which is the day after we just discussed where she disappeared into the night, Alex Diaz, Shannan's live-in boyfriend, would call Michael Pack. Pack would act surprised, however, and gave Alex the contact for Joseph Brewer, the John. Guarded and distrustful of the situation, Alex drove from their New Jersey home to meet Joseph Brewer at the gate of the Oak Beach community. He came ready with a tiny pistol he could easily hide in his palm of his hand, just in case. They met at the gate under cover of dark, and Alex felt alarmed when the disheveled Joseph Brewer came out, insisting that Alex come to his house and search the house. Come on, come to the house. You can search my house. Obviously, Joseph was trying to calm and reassure Alex, but not knowing him and his girlfriend just missing, how else would he feel? So he says, I'm going to call the cops. And Joseph Brewer goes, go ahead. So, emboldened by this, he says, let's drive down. So they drive down to the precinct together to report Shannan missing. Now, when they got there, the officers didn't take this serious at all. Alex recalls that they could barely contain their laughter, saying that she's probably out and she'll come back. Something is a common theme that throughout all these girls' stories is that the cops did not take it serious. At least at the time. It does seem like they're making a little more of an effort now, but under the direction of Jimmy Burke, for sure, they did not care about these girls. They were too busy doing a cover-up on Christopher Loeb. If only they put the same attention, buying burner phones and such, into covering up their beating of Christopher Loeb, maybe they would have gotten a little more info when this first broke. 7 months later, in December of 2010, an officer and his dog Blue were doing a training exercise. They know Shannan Gilbert's missing, so he, quick thinking, knows that the FBI statistics says that most bodies are dumped on the side of a highway or a road. So he decides to go over by Ocean Parkway, which would be on the back side of those houses where she went missing. His dog Blue picked up a scent. Despite the cold and a light dusting of snow, it picked up a scent, and around 50 feet into the dense brush that lines the parkway, they felt the skeletal remains, a young woman, in a disintegrating burlap bag. As the light covering of snow drifted and the winds pushed, it was one body after another. 4 in total, and they were dubbed the Gilgo 4. 50 feet in and approximately 500 feet apart, you have Maureen Brainerd Barn, missing since Monday, July 9th, 2007. She was 25 years old. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall and approximately 105 pounds. Next, you have Melissa Bartholomew, missing since Friday, July 10th, 2009. She was the first found. She was 24 years old, 4 feet 10 inches tall, and weighing around 95 pounds. Next, Megan Waterman, missing since Sunday, June 6, 2010. She was 22 years old. The only one that was odd out. She had 5 feet 5 inches and weighing about 145 pounds. The last to go, Amber Costello, the last of the so-called Gilgo 4. She went missing Thursday, September 2nd, 2010. She was 27 years old, 5 feet tall, and around 100 pounds. These 4 women had all worked as Craigslist escorts. Now, even between the 4, there was some commonality and some differences. So Megan Waterman and Amber Costello had both been working on Long Island and seemed to have some comfort level with their last known John. We know this as both girls strayed from their normal routine, built to ensure their safety. no phones, meeting in spots picked by the John. This would ensure no one would see them leaving. Now, this was just odd behavior for the two of them. They both had tried and true behaviors that they stuck to religiously to make sure that they were safe, but they broke them that night. Megan Waterman, working out of a hotel in Hauppauge, sat right off the LIE, the Long Island Expressway. Her pimp, known as Vibe, says he was in Brooklyn at the time of her last date. The police have released footage of her time in the hotel. Now, according to the book Lost Girls, Megan left the hotel at 1:30 a.m. and someone reported seeing her walk down the dark, deserted service road towards a gas station at the next major intersection. Today, there's a red light camera, but presumably in 2010, there was no such luck. The gas station on the corner also shut down for a period of time and was rebuilt after this 2010 incident. So any physical evidence or cameras that may be there are long gone and lost. Presumably the cops would have asked for it anyhow. Back in 2010, that area was also very desolate. Now you had that service road, but it's very dark there even today. And then on the opposite side of the hotel is just a commercial industrial type zone. Very, very low key, especially at night, 1:30, there would be no one there. It would be very dark and deserted. So her walking along the service side, maybe you have a few cars passing, but it generally speaking would be pretty quiet. Now, Amber Costello, she was living in the town of Babylon with two male roommates and her sister. The house had become known for its illicit visits from Johns, many of whom Amber and her roommates would scam. Now, as drugs were a huge part of their lives, heroin being the driving force, the house became a mess. Now, from this roommate, we find that Amber spent the day going back and forwards with this last John. They were negotiating price, and there was almost like a seduction. I'm sure both sides felt like they were getting over on the other, with the prices going high, and little does the other side know. Now, Amber ultimately having to agree to this extraordinary price at $1,500, which is Amber, a full-blown addict at this point. She did not get offers like this, and as such, she let her guard down. Maybe she worked with this guy before, maybe she didn't, but the $1,500 allure as a drug addict is too much for most. And she let her guard down, and she left the house with no phone, no purse. The John insisted that she walk down the road to the next intersection so she would get in the car with no one the wiser on what vehicle they were using. Melissa Bartholomew and Maureen Brainerd Barnes, on the other hand, disappeared from New York City, just like Jessica Taylor did 4 years earlier. Now, Maureen was from Connecticut, but she was working at a cheap hotels in New York City, so she would avoid getting evicted from her home in Connecticut. Okay, so due to unplanned circumstances, though, she ended up left alone in the city. Now, this was also a veer from the norm for her, so her self-defense mechanisms were let down. We know the night she disappeared, she had called home to ask for a ride, stating that she had been robbed of all her money that she made that weekend. But they said it was too late and they couldn't give her a ride. She said, fine, I'll find my own way home. It didn't seem to be a big deal, just a matter of fact. She'll find her way home. She was at the Port Authority, a major transition point for people going in and out of the city. And just a reminder, Jessica Taylor was last seen at Port Authority. So this is a recurring theme. Port Authority is a major transit hub where people go in and out of the city. Melissa Bartholomew was a streetwalker. She worked for a pimp named Blaze. They actually worked the streets outside of strip clubs. When the men would come out all hot and heavy, not being able to touch the girls all night, they would come in and seal the deal late in the evening. Eventually, however, she felt that Blaze was, in her own words, using her up in order to pay for his wife. She disagreed essentially with how much money he was taking. However, just like any other illicit gang or other type of drug dealing, it's not easy to break away. And when she did try to break away from Blaze, he had her beat up. A group of women beat Melissa. She balled up on the ground and they were punching and kicking her when a man walked up and said, "This is what you get for disrespecting me." A witness later identified that man as Blaze. Undeterred though, Melissa would continue to book dates off of Craigslist and dreamed of one day opening a salon of her own. That's really what she came to the city for. A legitimate business is what she wanted. Melissa was last seen at her Bronx home. Blaze would later confirm that he knew Melissa had a $1,000 date in Long Island shored up for the night. In that same book, The Lost Girls, Blaze would also say he knew who the John was and where the date was, despite Melissa not allowing him to drive her. Melissa declined his offer for the ride, yet somehow Blaze knows who this John is. It sticks out. It's very weird that he would say that, and that's it. There's nothing else behind it. You would think that would mean he knows who Lisk is. For 10 days, Melissa was missing, the police openly stating to the family lawyer that she was a hooker and that they wouldn't assign a detective to something like this. For those 10 days, her family, her younger sister Amanda, all worried. Melissa's landlord knew something was wrong, as Melissa had taken in many stray cats and they cried and clawed at the door when their owner didn't come home. 10 days, no DNA, no canvassing. It was only after they checked her phone records and noticed that a cell tower in Massapequa, Long Island, pinged when someone checked her voicemail. What changed their mind was when Amanda, Melissa's 16-year-old sister, received a call from Melissa's cell number. Only it wasn't Melissa, it was a man's voice, one she would describe as calm and with no accent. The calls would start on July 16th and abruptly stop in late August 2009. The man would call Amanda a racist term. He would state matter-of-factly that he killed her sister and was watching her rot. He would ask her if she was going to become a prostitute just like her sister. Oddly, when Amanda tried to have her mother answer, the man would immediately hang up, only wanting to talk to Amanda. The phone that Amanda had wasn't set up to record, and by the time they bought a phone that would record, the phone call stopped. Sadly, his voice was never recorded. These calls have been one of the best-known clues of Lisk. The news hypothesized that the man may have had a background in law enforcement, as he knew to never stay on the phone long enough for them to track him down further. Then the calls were coming from well-populated areas of Manhattan. Places like Penn Station, Times Square, places we already know to be a hunting ground for Lisk. Let's go back to late 2010 and early 2011, when Suffolk County is searching Ocean Parkway by Gilgo Beach. At this point, all the police have are 4 women dubbed the Gilgo 4. The police have not found Shannan Gilbert, but they have substantial reasons to keep searching. Yet, January 24th, 2011, Police Commissioner Dormer inexplicably calls off the search due to the weather. I find this to be odd and off-putting, as there were families, including the Gilberts, who wanted to know where their daughters were, and they were forced to wait.
She's a fighter. She don't back down.
The 22-year-old waterman who works as an escort went missing on June 8th after a trip to Long Island with her boyfriend, Akeem Cruz. Since then, Ela has held out hope authorities would find her daughter. That is until she heard news of 4 decomposed bodies found on a Long Island beach this weekend. Scarborough police say one of the bodies could be her daughter's, since it was in the vicinity of where she was last seen.
Even though there is that uncertainty that it's not her, how much of it in your heart do you feel like this could be her?
90%. It's been too long.
And when you're done, take it out and just put it back away. Okay.
In order to find out for sure, Scarborough police asked Ela for a swab sample to see if her DNA will match one of the bodies.
In a matter of just trying to, again, speed the process up, these type of samples would be less processing and quicker turnaround.
Come early spring, the search continued, and on March 29, 2011, 1 mile east of the original site, police discovered a skull, a forearm, hands, which would later be identified as belonging to Jessica Taylor, who we discussed in our previous video. I'll put a link below in the description. Less than a week later, on April 4th, 2011, the body of an Asian male dressed in women's clothing was discovered.
Identified Asian male, who was estimated to be between the ages of 17 and 23 years old at the time of his death, is approximately 5 foot 6 inches tall, had poor dental health, missing both top and bottom molars, and one of his top front teeth. Investigators have determined that he was wearing woman's clothes when his body was found.
The cause of death strayed from the norm for Lisk, and as Asian Doe died of blunt force trauma to the head. So, we have to speculate here. Did Lisk pick up a transgender sex worker and then find out Asian Doe was not biologically female, and in a fit of rage, beat Asian Doe? It's purely speculative, But Asian Doe is interesting as it opens the doors to other victims that we will discuss later in this video. On April 4th, they also found the skull, hands, and foot of Jane Doe number 6, who we now know as Valerie Mack.
Jane Doe number 6, whose head, hands, and right foot were recovered along Ocean Parkway on April 4th, was linked by DNA to a torso discovered in Manorville on November 19, 2000. We have determined that these remains are of a young Caucasian female, 18 to 35 years old, approximately 5 feet 2 inches tall.
Finally, and very sadly, there was a female toddler, no more than 4 years old, found wrapped in a blanket with no signs of trauma. She would be known as Baby Doe. Baby Doe, as we know from the part 1 of this Lisk series, was linked to Peaches by DNA. Peaches was the mother, and this is interesting as it opens questions. Did Lisk work with a woman? Is this why Peaches felt comfortable bringing her child with her on these dates? Some profilers believe so. Was Peaches someone who was in a relationship with Lisk? Was Baby Doe related to Lisk biologically, not just in this cruel scenario where he's the killer? We don't know, but it is telling that Peaches felt comfortable enough with her killer to bring a child with her on the date. And remember, this is also one of the earliest known killings. If Baby Doe had lived, she would have been 28 to 30 years old today. Finally, on April 11, 2011, a plastic bag containing the upper and lower parts of the extremities later to be determined to come from Peaches. This was found by Zack's Bay, which is where the Jones Beach Amphitheater lays. To me, it's unnerving. For decades, world-famous music acts would play to 16,000 fans. Only a short distance away laid Peaches, her daughter, and less than a few miles down the road, the rest of these unfortunate victims. I know I've personally driven this road, and I know I catch myself staring out into the bush more often now.
As you know, the search for Shannan Gilbert has continued over the past year and a half. And I have mentioned many times that we were going to continue looking for Miss Gilbert. And the search that was conducted yesterday morning, or continued yesterday morning, was part of that search for her. During yesterday's search, a canine officer, John Malia, discovered items which included a pocketbook with identification in the pocketbook belonging to Shannan Gilbert. We believe that this is her pocketbook. Sometime after the pocketbook was found, a pair of jeans, a pair of shoes were found. We believe that they may belong to Shannan Gilbert. That has to be determined, but they're found in the same place that the pocketbook was found. Today, during the search, they found a cell phone, which they believe may belong to Shannan Gilbert. Now, it's our belief that her body or parts of her remains may be in that location. That's why the search is going to continue today till it gets dark and then commence again tomorrow. Search will continue into the foreseeable future. Hopefully we'll find her remains and at least move this investigation closer to a conclusion.
And the truth is, we may never know exactly what did happen to Shannan Gilbert. After this much time, the medical examiner may not be able to exactly pinpoint the cause of death. I mean, the body, if that is in fact her, has been out 18 months.
You point out in your piece of how her family is convinced that she could be one of the victims. They talk about the 911 call, they talk about the placement of things that were found, but investigators, law enforcement, not convinced.
Well,
why is there just...
Why are they so convinced
that she is not?
Well, number one, I don't believe she's number 11. I don't think she's a victim of the serial killer, but she could have been murdered because she was afraid of something that night.
Sure.
I think the investigators say why she's not the 11th, for obvious reasons. Her body was found under very different circumstances. At least 4 of the bodies of the serial killer, the victims of the serial killer, were wrapped in Burlap. They were dismembered. That was not the way Shannan Gilbert's remains were found. But it is, I think, a little irresponsible for the police to say she absolutely drowned before there has even been an autopsy conducted.
It does seem that way.
In 10 seconds here, any closer at this point, investigators, to finding the serial killer?
Clearly not, because the Dormer police commissioner, Dormer, said to me it's one serial killer. Then yesterday the prosecutor said it's more than one. I think that says a lot.
It does.
Clip. Shannan Gilbert's remains were eventually found 18 months after she disappeared. Long enough that it was mostly bones and no body. The media attention on this case has been fiery hot. Even before the autopsy was done, Suffolk County was saying Miss Gilbert died of a drowning. It's also been said she succumbed to the elements. It's all just a little bizarre when you account for the 50 degrees temperature on the morning of Miss Gilbert's disappearance. I know Sheree Gilbert, Shannan's sister, doesn't believe that she died accidentally. After Suffolk County released the long-requested 9/11 call, the other Miss Gilbert had a press conference with her longtime lawyer, Mr. John Ray, to state that she believes her sister was murdered.
I just feel like they dropped the ball from the very beginning. They didn't allow the FBI to come in, and I just think that we definitely need somebody to come in independently and review this case.
During the press conference, they also stated that certain detectives should be removed, and this echoes other victims' friends and family who believe that an independent investigator needs to take up the case. Brosky, who I previously interviewed on this channel, is a friend of Amber Costello, sent a short video I'd like to include here.
And the only thing I want to add is, my heart goes out to all the families of everybody that has lost a loved one due to this horrible string of events. And I really have to say from the bottom of my heart that I hope Suffolk County will step off this investigation and hand it over to the feds, because we have put our trust into Suffolk County now for going over a decade, and they have given us nothing. The release of this information they've gave to the public has done nothing. We've put our trust into them, our confidence into them, and it's been nothing but letdown, exposure to corruptions, scandals, and cover-ups. I personally wish that Suffolk County will take responsibility for their errors and hand this over to competent investigators that will get this job done, because these girls deserve justice and the families deserve closure. And that's really all I have to say. God bless you all, and be safe. Much love.
As for Shannan Gilbert's murder or accidental death, I don't believe there's enough to know to the public to say for sure. I do have my personal opinions, and I put in for a Freedom of Information request for Shannan Gilbert's case file, but not surprisingly, it was denied. I do think Sheree Gilbert should continue her fight, as it's been wildly successful for her family, and it's great to see that she's taken up the mantle that her mother previously held. What do we know about Lisk? Well, for starters, and this was hinted earlier in this video, that the killer had a type. Young, in their 20s, petite. The bodies were found in Burlap. This could actually be a vital clue. Maybe he's a clammer, a gardener, but he's definitely someone that would be comfortable walking around with burlap, not something you often see in regular day life. Clamming is also not uncommon at all on Long Island. We also know he's a sadist, and the calls where he taunted the 16-year-old sister of Melissa Bartholomew illustrates his cruelness, as well his ability to dump a toddler on the side of the road. What he shows on the outside is charisma. He must be well put together, enough to convince these girls to let their guards down. Each of them had some sort of self-defense mechanism in place that was ultimately ditched in his instance. The FBI believes this person has some kind of intimate or personal reason to choose Ocean Parkway, as it's a small and out-of-the-way place. Another big clue, which we hinted at earlier, is the summertime occurrence. Outside of the case of Fire Island Doe and Asian Doe, every other person went missing in the summer months. The seasonal component could mean a few things. Maybe he lives there only in the summertime. Maybe his family leaves him alone during that period, which allows him to hunt. Or maybe he has a seasonal component to his job, like he's a teacher. Whatever it is, the seasonal aspect is important to his ritual. He is what the FBI Behavioral Science Unit would call an organized serial murderer. He has a car and carefully plans every detail, meticulously. Socially competent. There's a sense of complete control from the type of victim to the crime scene. These are not spontaneous. However, there is evidence that he depersonalizes the victim, and this would mean he may have other elements of disorganized killers as well. Posing a dead body is also a characteristic of a disorganized killer, and this may come up later when we discuss subjects, so keep it in mind. This hybrid of the organized, disorganized is something that the director of the FBI has taken the time to write up about in length. I will leave a PDF version of his report in the description. It's an interesting read if you find the psychology components of these stories worthwhile. We also know that none of the victims had plans to be driven back after their meeting with the killer, which tells us they felt confident this person would bring them back. There have been a ton of suspects floated, but I will do my best to boil this down to the most commonly touted people. We will start with the least likely and move on from there. I will note there's hardly a man in this story that's a good guy. If we expanded this section to include men who abused women, it would be a mile long. Between the pimps, the boyfriends who break their girlfriend's jaws, and the driver who has been arrested by the feds for bringing people into the country illegally twice, there just isn't a man I would want to know among any of them. First, and we made a video devoted just to him, Police Chief Burke. Burke is an interesting one, as he's corrupt and spent several years in federal jail after beating a suspect who broke into his car and stole a sex toy stuffed duffel bag. The attorney for Shannan Gilbert has even indicated that Burke may be more involved than previously thought when he found a sex worker who testified that Burke was at a sex party at Oak Beach, the same place Miss Gilbert went missing. There are many who believe that Burke and an evil cabal of other prominent men from Suffolk County were creating snuff films with these sex workers. While Burke is a morally bankrupt man who did some horrible things, the facts do not line up with the conspiracy that has been cooked up on the internet. However, Jimmy Burke definitely holds some blame for his attempts of subverting the investigation. Jimmy Burke took over the case shortly after the initial discoveries. He took over in 2012. And one of his first orders of business was to kick the FBI off the case. Can't have another agency sniffing around. They may see Jimmy for what he truly was, a gangster with a badge. If you'd like a little more background on Jimmy Burke and who he is and what he's done, I did make a video. I'll put the link above. There's also a good book that was just put out. It's written in a Martin Scorsese mob type way, appropriately, and it's called King Jimmy. If you like reading or audiobooks, definitely take a look. The good doctor who ran the home for wayward girls. Next is Peter Hackett. This is a man that needs no introduction if you follow this case. Peter Hackett most notably faked a heart attack when confronted by a news crew. It's an oldie, but let's run that clip here on the off chance you haven't seen it. Dr. Hackett called Shannan Gilbert's mother the day after she went missing, and he denied it until he was presented with call records proving he was a liar. This is an odd coincidence, as we know Lisk like to call his victims. They like to call them and toy with them. However, in this case, Dr. Hackett used his real name, so it's probably a weird coincidence. Dr. Hackett, for his part, denied ever making the calls until he was confronted with proof. It is now believed he got the number from Alex Diaz, Shannan's boyfriend, when he came back to the neighborhood to pen missing posters up. This would line up with the timeline. Now, the doctor is described as a loudmouth. Even when certain authors are being charitable when writing about him, they can't help but ponder how far his deceptions really go. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if we found out one day he did have something to do with Shannan Gilbert's death. John Ray, the Gilbert's family lawyer, has done a great job of keeping the fire to the doctor's feet. He brought a civil suit against him. Now, the depositions have been invaluable in helping create a timeline. We see many of the key players discuss the case under oath. I'll include a link in the description to anyone that's interested in further reading. John the John. Finally, we have John Bittrolff. On July 5th, 2017, Bittrolff was found guilty of murdering 2 sex workers in the early 90s. Bittrolff, for his part, was able to remain free and under no suspicion until a DNA hit on an unrelated case. His brother had given DNA due to a domestic incident, and this started the gears of justice to land on John Bittrolff. Both the sex workers were posed naked in degrading ways in the woods by Manorville, the same town that Valerie, Mack, and Jessica Taylor would be left. Bittrolff lived around 3 miles from where Miss Mack and Miss Taylor would be dumped. Now, there's some other weird connections, too. These may or may not mean anything, so keep that in mind. One of the original victims, Rita, her adult daughter, was good friends with Melissa Barthelemy. Melissa's mother would also tell news reporters that her daughter had a lot of calls from Manorville at the time of her disappearance. While this is a jaw-dropper, we must remind you that circumstantial evidence could be little more than a coincidence. Any good police force will tell you sometimes weird connections exist, and they don't always mean what we wish them to mean. However, Suffolk County District Attorney's Office did release a statement saying that Bittrolff was likely responsible for other deaths, even bluntly adding that this could include the Gilgo beach bodies. If it's not Bittrolff, I would think it's likely someone like him. And nobody, someone flying under the radar, someone you wouldn't suspect. However, you do suspect, please call in. There is a $50,000 reward, and forget the money. Forget the money. You'd be the one that helped crack this case and helped the families get the justice they deserved. Number on the screen. I have also put in for a Freedom of Information request for the Bittrolff case, and it was also denied. The excuse in this case is that he is on appeals, which he'll be on for decades or more easily. All right, I've had other cases in other states where they're on appeals or they're going to court, and we've still been able to get, even if it's a heavily redacted, but we do get a case file. We weren't able to get anything. To me, it's BS. Anyhow, we're going to continue to fight for that case file on this one, as we would like to know more regarding John. There are other suspects like James Bissett. He's a super wealthy business owner who killed himself the day after the discovery of the bodies. What's interesting is Bissett also had a gardener nursery business, which was a major supplier for Burlap on Long Island. And we know the Gilgo 4 reportedly found in Burlap, and that's part of that FBI profile. They said someone that would be involved with Burlap. This also goes back to the people that believe that the police chief, Jimmy Burke, is involved with a cabal. They think that he's the head. You know, to me, it's ripped right out of the Dexter season where there's that group of friends. I think it's not very likely. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible, but it just seems like it's kind of out there, and it breaks the mold of what we know of serial killers. It's usually one person working alone, maybe two, but not a group. It's very hard to keep a group of people silent. Final thoughts. So when I started this video, I had some very ambitious plans. However, recording part 2, I've caught COVID, and in fact, I'm still fighting it off. So as such, I'm going to end the video here, but I would like to make one more part to explore some of the more out-of-the-way theories and some other possible victims, like Andre Sugar Bear Isaac, the drag queen from East New York that was dismembered and found partially on a Queens County beach and a pond on eastern Long Island, not far from Manorville. Even Suffolk County at one point included him on their official website. If you'd like to see the final video tying all of this together, please leave a comment below, which reminds me, I always hate to ask, but if you think this video was good and should be seen by others, please give a like and a comment, as this is how YouTube knows to suggest this to other people. I'll be putting out videos every other Sunday, so check back if you're interested in other cases as well. Thank you so much. This is Zach Winters. Bye-bye.